Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. For those of you who are new to my podcast, you could consider hitting that subscribe button as well as bell notification icon to stay up to date to interviews coming your way. And you could also follow us on mindbodyspirit.fm for the audio syndicated podcast. Today, I have the distinct honor of having on as my guest Kellee White. Kellee is an incredible medium, intuitive, fellow psychotherapist, and also author of the book Cracked Open. Kellee's going to be providing so much information and helpful information at such a pivotal juncture in time in all of our lives. So without further ado, I bring on Kellee White as my honored guest in the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Kellee White, it is my distinct honor to have you here as my guest in the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. How have you been?
Oh my God. Thank you, Jacob. It's my pleasure to be here today. Oh my gosh. Thanks for having me on. It's truly appreciated.
Yeah, I know plenty of my viewers are probably familiar with your book, which we'll discuss, soon, Cracked Open, as well as your co-host with, the one and only James Van Prague, which I personally tune into as a student, and I love your podcasts. But, today's episode is really taking a closer look at Kellee White herself, and I know you've influenced so many people, but it's my way, my viewers' way of just getting a better understanding of the work that you're doing and how you came into being and the why, how it influenced the how and the what. So I just would like to kind of begin by the genesis because we have a lot in common. And I think viewers of this particular conversation will soon understand this. But just kind of tell us a little bit about, before we go there, the current work that you do for maybe some of the viewers who, haven't heard of Kellee White and, the passions and, the brilliance that you bring to this field.
Well, I'm very flattered, but thank you very much. I mean, I've always known I had a mission on Earth,
Mhm.
and I have a dual mission right now. And I am a licensed psychotherapist, and I'm
Mhm.
also a spiritual medium. And so I've always known that I'm here to help psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists to understand the spirituality that people come to them when they have issues and they need to understand spirituality. I think it's very important, especially the way the world is going now. And the other thing that I bring to the table is to help mediums and psychics understand when they're giving a message that there really needs to be a psychological component to the work that they do. So it's kind of, my work is twofold. I work with grief, deep grief. When you're a medium, you work with grief. I work with trauma. And I believe that we have generational trauma that comes into play when we incarnate. So we might have 13 generations of trauma behind us. And until some brave soul comes forward and says, we're going to do the work to stop the trauma, or to begin to clear the trauma, that trauma will continue on.
Wow. You are like a soul sister for me because, tonight I'm going to be training a CEU course, a continuing ed course for fellow therapists to understand spirituality and their psychotherapy practice. But I love that you're championing this cause. My question for you is, what do you feel is the missing link, or perhaps what got you inspired to be a groundbreaker to incorporate spiritual awareness and psychotherapeutic practice?
So I come from a background of psychology. I think you and I have that in common. My mother was a really well-known psychologist. My daughter's a psychologist. My son-in-law is a psychologist. My first husband was a psychologist. I always knew somehow I was going to be in psychology. On some level, it's somehow I just kind of figured that out. But what I always have known is how important the relationship to our wounds are to us going forward. I've always known that we have, we come into life and we have certain traumas and certain issues that we have to deal with that can stop us, that can help move us forward. It's an interesting life dynamic when we choose Earth School, and one of the most profound experiences I ever had that was life changing for me was meeting my partner James Van Prague. He really helped me understand the spiritual aspect of what I was going through, and I also knew the spiritual aspect. I had to include the psychological aspect of everything. 'Cause I like
Wow.
to use lenses when I do my work. I'm not sure how I'm sure you use different lenses as
Mhm.
well. So if you see a client, all of a sudden you're using a spiritual lens, or you might be using the psychological lens. What's really going on with this person?
Mhm.
So I like to use different lenses. And maybe it's a past life situation. Maybe it's a situation that's going on now. Maybe it's trauma from several lifetimes ago. So I never know. So I use different lenses for different things.
Yeah. And obviously psychology, we think of certainly the study of the mind and how you conceptualize and construct the mind could depend on what particular lens you're seeing it. If you're seeing the lens from a pure psychological lens, there might be some limitations.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely, there would be limitations, and the other thing I do is I wanna know why somebody incarnated. Like, that for me is so important. So I look at the birth date. I wanna know because before we incarnate, we choose our birth date. We
wow.
choose our names. We choose our families. We make all kinds of choices
Mhm.
before we come into Earth, to Earth school, which is the hardest damn school. But when we come here, I like to know what somebody's birth date is because then I follow it up with, okay, that's why they incarnated. They needed to do this, 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 and this. And that really helps me a lot with looking at the lens that I use.
Mhm. So from a client perspective, if you're going through depression, grief, trauma, how would you pinpoint as to how not just psychotherapeutic practice could be helpful, but potentially spiritual awareness could be helpful within that client's capacity to have resolve and resilience past, their predicaments?
I Spirituality brings hope.
Mm,
And spirituality brings an understanding or a different awareness, again, of why we are even here to begin with. And it lifts the soul, and the soul starts to remember, oh yes, I'm here on earth at this time for a reason. And you start to kind of click into an awareness of that. And I think spirituality is everything. It does show our resilience because you think on life, you go, I mean, I'm sure as a therapist, you must think, how did this person go through this and survive? I'm always curious, aren't you?
Oh, of course. Yeah. And sometimes it feels like people are cats where they have like 9 or 10 lives, and we're one of them, and we'll get to the near death experience parallels that we have together. But absolutely, yes, I agree fully.
I mean, I think when we embrace our spiritual nature, life shifts for us. I worked with somebody yesterday on a Sunday that was who had lost a friend, a good friend, to suicide just this last week, and it was a daughter of one of my oldest friends. And so I had knew that I had a small amount of time to really help shift the awareness because when a door opens for suicide, the door opens, and
Mhm.
other people can suicide. So I had to really come bring her into a place of spirituality and understanding the soul. So for me, that is everything. Understanding why the soul is here at this time and the courage it takes to be a soul at this time takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of resilience. That's one of my favorite words.
I'm glad I threw that out there.
Yeah. Like one of my favorite words.
It's a big word that we learn in grad school, in social work school. It's like one of the biggest words, as well as meeting the client where they're at, which
Yeah.
I mean, for you, you might encounter a client who's a skeptic. Um, like how do you
So early on in so it was kind of funny. So I was a medium first, and I could talk about how that all came about. But I was a medium, and I always knew that because of my mother and everybody else in my family, I knew I was going to go to grad school. It was a knowing. So I was a medium first, then I go to grad school where I did not share anything that I did with anybody. Nobody knew. In fact, my professors all asked me to teach at grad school. Nobody had a clue how I got there, nobody. But because of that, I then had, it was because of James Van Prague. He said to me, look, you've got to use this gift as a medium. And my mother too. My mother was so supportive of me being a medium, but also I needed the psychological balance with it.
Mhm.
And so because of that, I slowly started integrating the work that I was doing. I always had my medium clients. That was always going to be a given. But with my psychology clients, I would slowly kind of start talking about the soul and a spiritual. I only had a couple of people that were like, really? You're like a Madam Woo Woo here? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And, but then they became my biggest, fans. So it's kind of funny how that works. So I just put it together and now it's just who I am. If somebody would come to me, it wouldn't be because they were a skeptic. They would know my work at this point.
Absolutely. Certainly being in the spiritual field, we spoke to how, spirituality could help out with psychology. My question for you is what's the role that psychology could play in, people who
Great
are
question.
on the spiritual path?
Mhm.
And what do you feel are maybe some of the gaps at play that you've noticed throughout the years in your practice that really could be improvised and maybe
Well,
altered a little bit?
I if you, I feel that the psychological tools are really important.
Mhm,
I do. I'll never downplay them. I think they're really, really important to understand if somebody's anxious. Let's go there. What happened? Like,
mhm,
why are you anxious? Why are you depressed? Let's get into
mhm,
that. What is the trauma here? What has gone on in your life? What brings you to this moment?
mhm,
And then so I will use, again, that's a lens I'll use, a psychological lens of analyzing now, and to come to let's get a plan together.
mhm.
But when I had my near death experience, and I know we will talk about this, but the thing that I noticed the most, well, I noticed so many things, was that there was no such thing as mental illness. It was all trauma from
Mm,
way, way, way back, and that somebody in this family comes in with it. So I understand why we need a diagnosis. I get that because
mhm.
that helps with the treatment and all of that.
It's
But
also
on
an
the
it's an insurance caveat too. So
Absolutely, and I understand all of that, but
yeah.
there's a greater picture
Mm,
going on here with it.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly there's a big dynamic with the why and the how and the what. And when I'm sure for you, when you're able to give, clients the reasoning as to why they are the way that they are, why they feel the way that they feel, that must be incredibly cathartic and life altering for them.
It is, and I'll tell you what, the thing that I love using the mediumship, this piece, is, and I do spiritual counseling now, so I'm not beholden to
Mhm,
the necessarily the norms of traditional psychology,
mhm,
where you kind of allow the person to get to where the person takes their time getting to what they need to do. For me, I call myself a soul cracker. Like, I want to go right on in and say, okay, why are you here? Boom, here we go. And that literally opens them right up. I love to crack people open. I seriously do. And then to see where they are with everything. Oh, and then once they get a an understanding about themselves, and I'm all about know thyself. Everybody needs to
mhm,
know thyself. It's I can't tell you, it's life changing for them.
mhm. Yeah. There's such a tremendous association with beliefs and
Mhm.
identity and how that influences our behavioral
Uh,
engagement with the world. And you, in your practice, are opening up space for people to really alter beliefs, to remind themselves, hey, I'm not PTSD. I'm not
right.
major depressive. I'm
Absolutely.
not bipolar. I have these things, but there is a you beyond the you.
Absolutely. And
So I
that's
love,
so important that you mentioned that. It's everything, because a belief system will keep you in a space. It'll just keep you here, and you can't move forward if you are stuck in a belief system.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
I like to break open belief systems.
Whereas Suzanne Giesemann calls them BS.
Yeah, it's the truth. Oh, that's right. We had Suzanne on our show. It's true.
Yeah.
I love that one.
She's a
Yeah.
friend of mine. Yeah, she was also at the Helping Parents Heal conference as well, and Wonderful. But let's talk about cracked open, because that is something I know many of my viewers are familiar with within my work and my NDE, but I've never met someone. This is the first time I met someone in my life that has really emphasized that concept in their work, in the parallels that we've had. So I feel like I'm talking to myself here and in another lifetime in a parallel universe. But enough about me, kind of boring right now. You is what we want to hear. I want to hear cracked open and how that all began for you, and really taking through our viewers what that moments were like in your NDE and your transformation. Because it is a profound story that we would be remiss to miss out on.
Thank you. Well, like you, we have this in common. When I was 3 years old, I did have a near death experience. I had encephalitis and you had pertussis. Is that about right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and isn't it funny? 3 years old. Wonder why 3 years old? I always find that kind of interesting. At 3 years old, a lot of things happen to children between, birth and three. So 3 years old, I had a near death experience and I found myself on the other side. Now, my undergrad was child development. So I understand that a 3-year-old could not understand the concepts that I knew at 3 years old. But I knew at 3 years old, when I was on the other side, that I was told by my aunts and I didn't have aunts. So my aunts on the other side told me I had to go back into my body because my mother would not be able to have her destiny fulfilled, and my mother had large shoes for her destiny, and that I had to go back. Now I can tell you that explained when I went back into my body. I had encephalitis and inflammation of the brain. When I went back into my body, the pain, the sadness, and the depression, it never left. That depression stayed probably for years and years and years, because I could never understand. I understood why I had to come back, but there was such a sadness with me. There was always a sadness. And my mother would always say, I'm here Kellee, I need you to, or I want you to be, to bring joy to you. I want you to experience fun. And I was one of these kids that I was as serious as they get. I mean, I was like, I was not fun. I may have looked fluffy, but I was like serious. I was a serious kid. I've been serious my whole life. But I knew when coming to Earth was going to be a serious situation. But that was so I had a near death experience at 3. I was always seeing things as a kid. I would always see spirits around. I'd get messages always, but I just wanted normal. I just wanted a normal life, whatever normal would be. But my father was a Jewish jazz musician and well known, and my mother was a Southern Baptist and ended up being a psychologist. So because and my grandparents and my great grandparents, they were all cantors and rabbis. And my mother's side, they were all like ministers and whatever. I mean, it was the damnedest thing. So they both canceled each other. So I had no religion. Thank God I did not have that. When I was younger, it was confusing. But thank God later, because what happened is I just wanted a normal life, and I wanted a normal life. So I had a good career, and then I kept getting promoted. And then I was really big in the corporate world. I ended up being a vice president of one of the largest corporations in the world. And I had a large life. I lived at the beach. I was a single parent. I had a wonderful life. And then, as fate would have it, because we have a destiny point, I was getting into my car after months of travel, and I was exhausted, and I smashed my frontal lobe getting into my car. And it wasn't just a normal smash. It was, now I know it as my guides going kaboom, and it was a kaboom, and cars don't move, it was, and I felt hot blood rushing in my head. But I turned to my daughter who was with me. She was 15 at the time. And I said, am I bleeding? Because I blacked out for a second. And I said, am I bleeding? She said, no, come on, we got to go. So I was taking her to see Sting at the Greek Theater. And as I was a mom on the go. And I did not understand the seriousness of a head injury. I really didn't. I thought you hit your head, you just keep going. It's no big deal. But a year and a half later, when I couldn't move anymore, and I started seeing, at first I saw my spirit guides. Yes, spirit guides exist. I saw Jesus. Yes, Jesus exists. I saw angels. Yes, they exist. All the
Mm,
things that I would have had no idea, I started knowing things and seeing things.
mm,
And then I had to get treatment for my head injury. So it was a remarkable experience to get to where I am now. And
wow,
then that's what my book is about, Cracked Open. I was literally cracked open and seeing all kinds of things. And I would appear, Jacob, I swear to you, if you saw me, I would appear normal, but half of me was living on the other side and
mm,
half of me was here. And
mhm,
I've heard mediums say, "Oh, that would be so great because then you'd have all the information you needed." No,
mm.
it leads you to schizophrenia. It leads you to a place where you burn out. There's no
Well,
way you can sustain that. There's no way you can sustain it. So
mm,
my guides were with me all along. You're never alone. My big message is I have a lot of messages, but you are never alone. It's not possible to be alone. It's actually not
mm,
possible. I know what people will think, "Oh, I'm alone and I'm so sad." You're not alone.
yeah.
You're just not possible.
And if only more people remembered who was
Yes.
truly around them,
Yes.
how could you ever be?
Well,
You
and the
know,
thing is, when we come to Earth, we have contracts. We come to Earth because this school is the school to go to. And there are souls that are line up to be on Earth at this time, particularly at this time, because according to my guides, this will grow our soul 7 times more to go through this experience, this timeline. This is a very powerful timeline that we're
uh,
on right
it better be 7 times the amount because things could be hard.
now. Right?
Could we up the ante to 10 or 5?
Hey, just keep going. Do your best here.
But, you said a lot of you dropped a lot of profound, droplets of wisdom, and I wanted to scale back to, in a way that trauma that happened to you in your car. My question is twofold. A, you mentioned it seemed like your brain cracked open, God came in. I'm wondering for you, what did that teach you about the brain
Oh, I learned a lot
and
about the brain.
and its role in mental health? And also, how did you personally ground yourself, from that type of experience where you were feeling literally walking in between 2 worlds and probably more so over there? How did you get back, into this body? Like,
Well, if I
what were you
just
doing?
start with the brain. So when somebody comes to me for a session, I will ask them, "Did you ever have a head injury?" And they'll
Mm,
say, "No." And I'll say, "Really? Okay. You're angry? Yeah. Uh-huh. And you're really angry? Uh-huh.
mhm,
Did you fall out of a tree?" "Well, yeah, I did fall out of a tree, but okay. Were you in a car accident?" "Well, yeah." "Did you hit your head in the car?" I mean, people will go into such denial about this,
mm,
"Oh, somebody threw a hammer at my head and it hit my head, but I was a kid." Well, it changes the brain chemistry. So
mm,
brain chemistry is everything. Now I could take the lens back further and say we chose these experiences. I can look at it myopically, or I could go really far back to see why the soul and what's the lesson here. But if
mm,
we could each look at our own brains for possible head injuries, it could explain a lot of rage disorder. It explains a lot of things. And there are medications for this. So
mhm,
I've learned a lot about the brain. I learned a lot about medications. When it was finally diagnosed with me at UCLA, and there's a whole story about how that all happened in my book.
mm,
But when that happened, I learned everything about different meds. I could have had surgery. We decided not to go with surgery. We decided because it had been a year and a half.
mm,
Um, and my brain, I had a 5 millimeter hole and a subdural hematoma and a slow leaker. So I bled for a year and a half. So my rage was constantly coming up. And I never had rage in my life. I mean, never. So I learned a lot about the brain. So I think the brain is everything to help it. And it's mind, body, and soul. We have to look at all of the
mhm,
everything. So that's the first thing that I do is I
yeah,
look at that.
hmm.
And then what was the second part of that question?
Man, I'm having a brain fog myself here too. No, I'm just messing. Um, Well, I guess the second part was, like, how did you ground yourself? Like, you mentioned you were, like,
Okay.
over
That
there.
took a long time.
Um, yeah.
That took a long time. I mean, it set me on a pursuit of trying to find somebody that would help me. So my mother, who was a really well-known psychologist, she was known as the shrink to the stars. She had access to anybody and everybody. I mean, she was literally 1 degree of separation from anybody. And she helped me so much because it turned out, unbeknownst to me, because my mother never talked about it, that her father, my mother's father, was a physical medium. And I'm like, what? He was
Mm.
known as a table tipper. So he would go table, tip, table dance, so the table would rise and fall and all kinds of things. I had no idea. Like my mom said, well, we shouldn't talk about it. I'm like, what kind of Southern wasp is that? Like, yeah, like you just didn't, you saw what I was going through because
Right.
I couldn't contain my energy. So the problem that I had was that my Kundalini energy was just blasted open. And so my energy was just way, way, way out of the body. So if I was upset, things would shake, they would
Mhm.
rattle, they would break, they would pop, things would fly across the room. It was hard for me to figure out how to get grounded. So first I would start off with simple things, which was taking off my shoes and walking outside and trying to ground the energy. But ultimately, I found meditation. And ultimately, I would meditate. And I know this sounds like a crazy thing I'm going to say, but I would meditate 4 to 5 to 6 hours a day. And
Wow.
in fact, I meditated so much. So you have to understand, my doctor was a renowned neuropsychiatrist. So my brain was, I had EEGs every 6 months. I was having an EEG with my brain. I had every test known to man on my brain, but every 6 months I would have one. I meditated so much that my brain went into uh, theta, as if I was just a monk
Oh
somewhere.
my god.
So I could put myself in a state of meditation, which I still can at any time. So even though life will go crazy, I still have at any time, I have the ability to go inward and really, really hunker down. So that's how I did it. So that's was it. It was from deep, deep, deep meditation. And I realize that most people can't do that. But for me at that time, it's funny how the plan on the other side came together for me, which was to have to be almost in a silent place for a long time. And it took a couple of years, frankly, of
Mm.
that. And that's how I was able to do that.
It seems like this was kind of like a shake up, wake up period
Yes.
eventually. And a lot of this pain that you endured, influenced a new sense of purpose and calling.
Well, and that's when I realized my sense of purpose.
Mhm.
I realized, and I always knew that I had one. I was in the meat business, for God's sakes, and the food business, and I particularly worked for a meat corporation. I
Hmm.
mean, I was a vegan. I didn't even eat meat.
Wow.
I mean, it made no sense. That was like, but it paid really well, and so, the, you know, I had to, well, learn everything the different way.
Mhm.
I was forced to it. It would have taken a head injury. I was such a force in nature with what I did on earth before this that it would have taken that to have stopped me in my tracks.
Mhm.
And that's what happened. And then I always knew I had a purpose. I just didn't know what it was or how to get there until such a time that I did.
Well, I mean, it probably expedited the timeline of the
Yeah.
work that you're doing, for sure. And I like that you are able to speak on the brain because I'm a big believer. I'm a Taurus, my sun sign, but we like to ground things and make things as practical as we can. And so I follow the work of a man by the name of Dr. Daniel Amen.
Oh, I love
And,
Dr. Amen. So
and
Dr. Amen,
I'm sure you
so
know him from.
well, Dr. Amen was the counterpart to my doctor, Hamlin Emery. So Dr. Emery actually started even before that. And had I not had Dr. Emery, I would have seen Dr. Amen. And
Wow,
that's the kind of brain work that I had done. And it's
I love it.
everything. I love his work. And fortunately, he's got clinics all over and I send people to his different clinics.
Yeah, and I was a young kid, I think I was watching him on PBS perhaps, or one of
Mhm.
those kind of stations, and I'm just like, wow, brain health is a part of mental health, and
Yes, it is. It's everything.
it's not this mystical kind of thing,
Mhm.
and obviously he was taking the scans of some clients who are in court cases who might have, had engaged in some type of, sociopathic type behaviors. But again, he was able to use some of these brain scans to really explain, not necessarily justify, some of the behaviors. So I think that's such an important emphasis, obviously, in the work that you're doing, as well as understanding like the brain's role. And so for viewers, like, is with psychology and spirituality, just to get as clear as crystal, what is the brain's role? Is it a producer or a filter?
It's probably all of the above. We
All
have
of
to
the
have
above.
we have to have a brain in order with the body in order to function here.
Mhm,
We just have to. And my I was always more right brain than left brain.
mhm,
My mother was a full left brain person. I mean, a full left brain doctor. My father was a right brain musician. So I was always more right brain than anything. But we need the brain in order to function, in order to make good choices, in order to really think things through. I remember I had a boyfriend years ago. He said to me, you never think, you just do." And this is true. When I was younger, I was so intuitive. I would just do this.
mhm,
But as I get older, and I went to grad school, and I had to figure out, I have a left brain. I better start to use it. I had to figure out how to use it. But the brain it's mind, body, and soul. It's everything. You
mhm,
have to have all three. And what happened to me is that when I had my head injury, it opened up my pineal gland, and my
mhm,
pineal gland is the gland of the God energy that comes
mhm.
flowing through, and that's what happened to me, and it happens to a lot of other people too. But it's what happened to me. But the
No.
brain is it's as important. It's very important here.
Yeah. And I think you could agree with this, that there certainly was a double-edged sword to what happened to you. But to
Yeah,
be spiritual, you don't need a TBI per se, or,
correct.
your brain to be cracked open.
Yeah.
You could go through some of these steps that you mentioned, like meditation, which Harvard,
Mhm.
studies has been proven to really improve brain health. Simple things like pickleball, racquetball, ping pong, again, that extends your window of neural health, like, because it has this kind of like back forth, walking, blood flow, all
Right,
these things
right.
are of pivotal. Eating well, sleeping well,
Oh,
to,
for sure.
but
Taking really good care of yourself. Yeah.
that's big.
Yeah.
Which isn't always as highlighted in self-care. There's a lot of bypassing of physical health and psychological health, but that is all a part of our spiritual health.
It
I want to get
is.
it. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get a little bit more of a macro basis. Um, you also mentioned guides
Mhm.
as a big part of your work. For my viewers, and I have an angel behind me for a reason, they're here. But for people, like, what are the role of, spirit guides? I hear some people in the UK calling them guardian angels. I say it's Great Britain or UK, doesn't matter what you use. It's kind of, but what are the role of guides? And when a client comes into your office, like, do you see their
I
guides?
do.
Like
I
what are
do.
their
So one
roles?
of the things that happened right on with me early on is that I actually saw my guides with my eyes. They just appeared. That's again part of my story and cracked open. I was in Tahiti, and this was after my head injury, and one showed up, and then the other one showed up. And when they showed up, I knew immediately that they were spirit guides. And when that happened, it was like Casper the Ghost. If you remember Casper the Ghost, you may be too
Oh,
young for
sure.
that, but
No,
you remember Casper?
I'm a 90s kid.
Okay.
That was our MO.
Well, the whole thing with Casper was when anybody would see him, like their teeth would chatter, and like that was what happened to me when I saw my spirit guides.
Wow.
And so I always knew that they existed, but to see them was something else. And then after my head injury, every time I would see somebody, I would see a guide or two guides around them. So a spirit guide is a special energy that comes in that has been on earth before. Most of them, not all, but most of them have had at least one
Mhm.
lifetime on earth. So they understand how earth is. And a spirit guide is a contract that we make on the other side that knows us so well, that knows what our purpose is and helps us. Now, a spirit guide cannot, we have free will on earth. We come here with free will. So a spirit guide can't say, look, do this, do that, because we have free will. But what they do is they stand right here with us. They may influence our mind to do such a thing as this. And I use this example a lot. Let's say you're driving to the store. You're going to go to the store. And then all of a sudden you get this idea. I think, I'm going to go to Starbucks first and go get a coffee. And you're waiting in line at Starbucks and you run into the person you're supposed to meet. So a guide will influence us to help us stay on our path. But if we don't stay on our path, I always laugh too about, imagine two spirit guides in a bar going, God, my human, imagine that one, imagine my human. Because you know how hard it is. Now, also having said that, there are souls on earth that are working on earth currently in body to be a guide on the other side. So they will have taken on some really challenging aspects on life, like addiction or suicide or some major things, so they can help on the other side as a guide. Wow. So the spirit guides, and my belief is they're very different than angels, because I've seen all of them. They're very different. And angels are a whole different sect of energy. Sure. But spirit guides everybody has one. And I'll say this, you will see somebody with schizophrenia on the street, something like that. They have the most strong guides with them. And the reason they do is they took on a really challenging incarnation.
So in other words, it's, sometimes we associate spirituality with like a few select kind of people who might embody this work. But what you're saying is we all are spirits, we all have guides.
Yes.
And there's enough slices of the pie to go along. It's not just for the select few.
Oh gosh, no. Everybody, no. You wouldn't incarnate unless you had a guide. And it's funny because before we are born, before we incarnate in the body, we choose our mother, our father, our siblings, our soul group. We come with a soul group. We choose all of this. And we choose our guides, and we choose a reason why we're coming this time. Maybe we want to learn about empathy. So we'll have a challenging life until we learn the skill and understanding of empathy. Let's say we want to learn compassion. Might have a lot of experiences that would lead you to having compassion. But ultimately, the soul on earth is to here for forgiveness, understanding, compassion, love, kindness, self-worth. Self-worth is a big one why souls incarnate.
Well, it's amazing how, I'm sure you've seen this in the practice, where how you could be a victim or a victor of circumstances.
Yes.
And when you have a perspective that this is an earth school, this is an opportunity, this isn't a punishment, and you're able to see things from the long haul.
Yes.
That, again, I'm sure is a factor of psychological, spiritual resolve and resilience. And to be able to pivot, like we all get shaken up, sure. And we'll get into some of the shakeups that we've had in the last week or two. Yeah. But the pivot, I think, becomes, a little bit easier.
The pivot is important. To be able to pivot is important. And also, if you think about it, in our line of work, we run into all kinds of personality disorders. Mm-hmm. And what is the point of somebody with a personality disorder, whether they're borderline or narcissistic or whatever it happens to be?
Sure.
It's important because they teach us for us to set boundaries. They have a big purpose on life. You might have a mother that's a borderline and you're like, why did I would never have chosen her? Oh, you did.
Right.
Learn some boundaries, learn some compassion. And that's when I use a larger lens of the trauma that the mother would have come in with. Often all kinds of abuse that lead down to the personality disorder.
Mm-hmm. I love what you do in your work as an LMFT, correct? Licensed marriage family therapist, in a sense that it has spirituality with practicality. Mm-hmm. There's a spiritual part that we could go up to the Himalayas and meditate and, align our Kundalini energy. But if you can't get along with the people around you and your surroundings, then what good does it do? And so we are going to be releasing this video with Thanksgiving coming up on Thursday. Currently, we have to call it like it is. For many, they're just maybe electing to stay home, or they might be going into situations that they feel a little bit on edge with the current socio-political climate. My questions is twofold. A, any tips as to how to handle this, particular time of year? And also from a spiritual perspective, what is the role of family within this life and the people that have close, most most close proximity to us in some ways, in this reality?
So great question. We had a show recently with Greg Braden, and who's a mystic and a
Sure.
scientist.
We know Greg.
You
Yeah.
know, Greg, I just love him so much.
Oh,
And
brilliant. Brilliant.
brilliant, brilliant. And he was saying that during this period of time on Earth, there were going to be fractions of family, like families are going to fraction. And it used to be that we could go to our family and the family would understand. And, whatever adventures we would have or misadventures, the family would be there to hold us, to help us through whatever. And those times have changed. But before I should say after the election, before I knew who won or didn't win, because I don't keep my phone anywhere near my bed. I keep it in another room.
Smart.
And you're right. I have to, because I have to be able to sleep, and I sleep really well. So I woke up that morning and I heard very clearly, and I'll get messages like this, but this was directly to me. And it was a man's voice, it was definitely my guide. And he said, "Remember your assignment."
Say that one more time, please. I want my viewers to hear this loud and clear.
Remember your assignment.
Mm.
And my assignment on Earth has always been to raise the consciousness of the planet. It's always been to help people rise above. So if you are lucky enough to be here during this particularly intense timeline that we have,
Mhm.
then we have a lot of spiritual tools that we're going to need. And I always tell everybody, see where everybody is, everybody that are they in? I do this often with the work I do. Oh, are they in kindergarten? Are they getting their PhD? Are they getting their master's at this time? And I'm talking about metaphorically. Where are they in their spiritual growth? That's what I want to know. So when we come into a family, the whole family will have different levels of spiritual growth. My family is a perfect example. I mean, my family is as spread apart as it could possibly be.
Mhm.
And so you come in with a lot of love and understanding of where the different souls are coming from. So my first tip is to really understand and come from a place of that. Everybody that is claiming to be a light worker at this
Mhm.
time, I'm a light worker and I'm, well, guess what? You're going to, this is your time. Rise up, keep your spirits high, keep them high. This is a time to reflect on the deep soul purpose of being here. Maybe it's to show somebody love and compassion. That's why you would attend a family event.
Mhm.
But don't take on the anger of all of it. Really don't. If you're going to get triggered by different people, perhaps this is the one that you'd want to stay away from.
Mhm.
Until the energy kind of gets a little more in balance, and that's perfectly okay too.
Right. And is it possible for people to have balance while, ushering in unconditional love while also having those boundaries at the same time, to work against someone who might, be narcissistic or a bit
Right.
of a bully and take on some of that?
And that's where boundaries come in. I think I'll pass this year. I'm going to pass this year. I don't have the bandwidth right now.
Mhm.
And allow yourself not to have the bandwidth. If you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
This is a period of time where nobody may have the bandwidth for any of this. And then we'll get to a place of a different kind of understanding, or a different kind of love that continues here. I believe that we can get through everything.
We certainly hope because, I'm working in the mental health field and running a lot of support groups, at this time for
Yep.
people who might be struggling. And I could tell you the pain is visceral, it's real. There's a value in agonizing, but there's also value in organizing,
Right.
and I think figuring a way through this
Mhm.
is key. And, one step at a time, we're all trying to, find a way. But I love what you said because it's very empowering. There's a quote that I love. I forget who said it, but it said, "Yesterday I was smart, so I wanted to change the world. And today I'm wise, so I wanted to change myself."
I
And
love that. And the
that
truth
I think that's
is,
by Rumi, if I'm not mistaken, but yeah.
I love that. I love Rumi. But what's so true about that is really go inward for yourself. This is the time to go inward and do the work on yourself.
Mhm.
When I had my brain injury and I you asked how I grounded myself, and I had to learn how to meditate, and I had to really do that. I found a guru that kind of helped me along the way. And what she was all about was, I don't care how crazy the times get. I don't care if you're out in the middle of New York City and it's crazy, you go inward. So she taught me how to go inward in a way, in the midst of profound intensity. So I have that ability to do that, and everybody has that ability to do that. It just takes practice. And again, if you remember, the highest lens here is we wanted to be here at this time on Earth because the choices we make now will be so critical to our own growth and to the world's growth, but to our own spiritual growth. So kind of view everything as, oh, here's a teacher in my path. This teacher is going to teach me boundaries, or this teacher is going to teach me to be a warrior. And I view myself as, I've always viewed myself as a spiritual warrior here. So that's, so my job, and I remember my assignment is to raise the consciousness.
Yeah.
No matter what.
And obviously there's micro elements to the assignment and nuances.
Yeah.
To summarize collectively, is there a theme within the assignment on a collective basis that you find for people to remember it? Is it to act in love? Is it to honor yourself? Is there anything intuitively collectively with this assignment?
It's to come through with love and compassion, no matter what. Love and compassion and forgiveness and kindness. It's the answer to everything. It's love, kindness, compassion. So here's the real assignment. Everybody is having the experience of being able to evolve. And in evolvement, Earth will always have a school. It'll always be a school of chaos. And as the school of chaos, it allows us to evolve by our choices. Let's make good choices. Let's make kind choices. Let's be, have empathy. Those are why we incarnated at this exact time.
Yeah. And I think it's important to not to be the things that you don't like, to act differently and to see those as learning opportunities. If you don't like narcissistic behavior or bullying or anger, you have the opportunity to be different and to use those as a model. And I think families and people have imperfections, and we could take what makes sense, leave the rest behind, and rise above it.
Right.
So high tides rises all boats. And so I love what you said. The higher you are, the more you remember this, the better your surroundings, and you're able to think globally by acting locally. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit about this last couple of minutes about a little closer lens at your book, because I know plenty of my readers will absolutely love it, and I certainly encourage it. I know it's been endorsed by, obviously, James Van Praagh, who wrote the foreword.
He wrote the foreword.
Brilliant Virgo. I actually saw him on his birthday at Helping Parents Heal. It was celebrated it. But I know my friend Jen Weigel was also, on one of the list. But just wanted to ask you, obviously, we'll talk about the book in a little bit, but what was that like for you to just get this out in the world? And what has it brought you, regarding maybe, I'm certain, some of the incredible feedback?
Oh my gosh. So I knew when my book has a lot of supernatural things that happen to it, that happened to me, a lot of supernatural things in it. But I knew when I started down that road that I'd be writing a book on it. Now, when I met James later, he said, you have to write this. And I said, oh, I know. I actually had already started it. And it took me a long time to finish it because I really didn't know how it was going to end. And my story doesn't end, but how it was going to come about. So it took me a while to write it. But the feedback now is that it's empowering for people, that it's a spiritual book that has psychology in it. It's a spiritual book of my own experiences that I'm hoping that people will see in my experiences, their own reflection of their own experiences. And when they see that, then it can move people on. It gives them hope. It gives them a place to go with all of their experiences. And I hope it leads to a discussion with others.
And I don't know your impersonations of this, but I think it's almost Christ-like in a sense. And why I say that, without going down the dogmatic religious perspective, as Christ once said, the kingdom of heaven in me is in you. And I think by writing this book, you're able to see that, these experiences that you had, there's universality to it. There's not a monopolization of it. And hopefully, and I'm sure it'll lead to a lot of soul empowerment where people could certainly see themselves in your story and to own
Thank
themselves in your
you. I
story.
really hope so. I want people to break their own patterns. I want them to be able to be, free from whatever the belief system that was put onto them, and to
Yeah.
be able to move forward with empathy, compassion, kindness. That's why we incarnated. So that was the main reason I put my book.
Yeah. Well, the concept of story is profound in our journeys, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and we have stories that, we walk into and stories that we define. And certainly writing a book is one way to define that story. But for viewers, and I'm just wondering for you, like, what was the spiritual gains that you got from just purely writing the story?
Well,
What did it
getting
bring
it
to you?
out, it did. Thanks. Great question. It got a lot. I released a lot of this of what had happened along the way. And I know that some people in my family had the courage to read it. Some people have not, because it affected them directly. My mother really wanted me to write this story, and we started writing this together. And my mother died in April of 2018 of breast cancer, so we didn't get to finish it together. She was my ghostwriter, if you will, on the other side, but she really wanted me to write this to shake people up, to wake people up, and I
Sure.
really feel that I was able to do that. But it was a really good experience, writing a book, and you've written a couple, right?
Yeah. I got
Yeah, I mean,
these two behind me. Yeah.
there you go. I mean, it's a process. It's a whole process. I have another book coming out because people have said to me they didn't want it to end. They were reading it too fast for them because they couldn't stop, but then they didn't want it to end. So I have another book coming out, of what happened after that. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole deal. It's birthing a baby. you know?
It really is, and sometimes, it's a vulnerable position, like, you'll
Yeah,
hear great things and sometimes, not, but again, it's Don Miguel Ruiz not taking things too personally, recognizing that
yeah,
when people are filled with love, that's what they'll see. When they're filled with judgment, uncertainty, or just,
absolutely.
in a way, a defense mechanism because it's very vulnerable to be open to something new. That's true too. One of my final questions from you is one of my birthday twins, Shirley MacLaine. She wrote a book out on a limb,
Oh,
but
sure.
one of the phrases was, "In order to get to the fruit on the tree, you must go out on a limb."
Yeah.
And you've had, from your books to your podcast with James Van Prague, so many fruits of your labor. How did you take that step? Like, what was the pivotal factor? And people who are stuck right now listening,
Mhm.
how could they really learn from what you did in that transformation in your life to
You
really
have to take risks. You have to take risks. You have to go out on a limb. I loved Shirley MacLaine when that book came out, and she's a good friend of James Van Prague's, really good friend of James.
we got introduced because she is
Yeah.
my bucket list guest, and we're both 424 twins.
Oh my
She
gosh.
myself, she, and Barbara Streisand, and Kelly Clarkson,
Oh
all
my gosh.
424, but I can't sing.
Well,
In
that's a
other
good
ways,
one.
I do. Yeah.
That's all right. Well, I think that you have to take risks. You just have to. You cannot not take risks in life because you're not going to get anywhere. You'll get stuck. And the energy right now is all about moving forward. It is, if you have been stuck, this is the time to keep going because this is the energy that's on the planet now is energy going forward. So taking risks is a big deal. The other thing that James taught me years ago, because I had to get over this one, was what anybody thinks of you is none of your business. Like,
Mhm.
and I had to be really intense with this because I'd been a medium, but for a long time, and then grad school, and then I had to be like, do I hide this? And James is like, no. And even my mom, they were pushing me out of the nest, like you just go. And so I was one of the first psychotherapists and mediums out there, and I help a lot of the dual practice. I help a lot with people that are in a dual practice. But it's all life to me was about risk, and I just didn't care what anybody else thought. I just know my own truth and really know thyself. Know thyself. And that
Know
I
thyself and take risks. Listen, viewers. Those are, someone who's walked the walk and, has lived by that. And, I've seen it countless times. You also have a wonderful podcast, like I mentioned in the beginning. Um, how has that been like for you on your journey, like co-hosting with James?
Well, it's so
For the
funny. I
fam-
started with Dr. Shirley and Pellizzeri. So Shirley is a psychologist in Beverly Hills who was my mom's psych assistant. We became really good friends. I
Mhm.
mean, best friends, best friends. And Shirley said to me years ago, I'm doing a podcast. I'm like, a what? She goes, I want you to be my co-host. And I'm like, no, I'm in grad school. I can't do it. So I was never somebody that could do this. I would never even think about doing it. But she's like, no, we have to do it. Come on. So anyway, I did it with Shirley. I did it for years. And one day Shirley called me and said, I really don't want to do this anymore. So I said, okay, I guess I'll do it by myself. I mean, I'm not somebody that I might get sad or down for a moment, and then there was the weirdest thing. James called me. And I talk to James every day. And he called me and he goes, hi, honey, how you doing? I'm like, oh, Shirley just decided she didn't want to do the show anymore. And he said, can I be your co-host? And I go, what? You want to do a show? He goes, yes. And because it was right as 2020 was about to hit. And I was predicting 2020 and 2019.
Oh my God.
So I said to James, there's a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work. We have to help all these people. And we did. And so James and I have been together. Well, we've been friends for over 20 something years, but and he really helped me with everything, with my gift, with helping me bring it out and being fearless. Yeah, being fearless is everything. You've got to be fearless here. But also Shirley was really instrumental in helping me too.
Well, I have no shame in plugging all of your work, from your books to the podcast to your Instagram page, which I follow very closely.
Oh, thank you.
And why I say that is because I personally gained so much from your conversations that you have with James and some of the guests that you bring on.
We really are best friends. I mean, he's just the best guy in the world, and he's really, really smart. He knows so much. He has so much wisdom to provide with everybody. And the dialogues that we have are just really fun, really deep. And how it also would happen is James and I back in the day, we would always have deep conversations because it goes back to what I always said. I'm a very serious person. So he and I would go like, how are you doing? Okay. And we'd go right into it, with the depth of things. And that's what we bring to the show.
Yeah.
That has always been the same.
Undeniable. Before we end, Kellee, where's the best place for people to purchase Cracked Open?
Cracked Open. And here it is,
get a
right
reading?
here. Cracked Open. Here you go.
Beautiful. Oh my God.
Thank you. The cover won an award. I think it came in second place out of like thousands of entries. So I was really excited about that.
Well deserved.
Thank you. So excited. But you can buy it at Amazon. You can buy it, or also Barnes and Noble. And then
Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. And do you currently have availability for readings?
I put my schedule out once a month. And so I'll put it out at the beginning, and December is up right now. So there may be some sessions available left for December. And then soon I'll put up my January calendar. I have a lot of different book signings that I'm going to be doing. So I've got one coming up in Los Angeles I'm looking forward to. A couple in Los Angeles.
So West Coast friends, check out Kellee. What is your website again?
It's kelleewhite.com. KELLEEWHITE, KelleeWhite.com.
KelleeWhite.com. And she's on Instagram. Give her a follow as well. So obviously, Kellee, you are welcome back at any point in time. There is so much ground to cover with the work that you cover. And I know we were able to hit on a lot of areas. But I'm just wondering, are the guides or yourself have any messages, or you feel we were able to say everything we needed to? Is there any last messages for the viewers?
Yeah. That we will all be okay. We will all be okay.
We'll all be okay.
Yeah.
It always was, will be, has been okay in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yes.
All right. Kellee White, thank you so much. An honor to have you on. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you. Well, that was a wonderful, heart-centered, deeply wise, and powerful conversation with Kellee. I got so much out of it, from learning her own story to personal insights to what the other side can say within this life, and how to live a connected life. So thank you for tuning into my conversation with Kellee. I know it was impactful, and let's continue to ascend and climb up the eternal ladder right here on the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. to you and your loved ones alike. Thank you. God bless. All my love.